mining at Godolphin. Up here. I trimmed out up here this morning just to accommodate.
Thank you very much. It's appreciated.
Yes. Yeah. This is, we're up on South Wheal Breage now. About 50 yards in that direction is Highborough Shaft, which is 860 feet deep. And that was the one that I said was pumped by flat rods from the Leeds engine house over there. Back in the 1840s, though, it had its own winding engine up there and its own pumping engine down here, about 50 yards down here. And that was the main, another sump shaft was the main shaft as well down there. And there were numerous middle shafts, just like brickwork, in between. And this is one of them. It's only 60 feet deep, but it's probably responsible for my fanaticism with tin mining. It's what got me into it. I should explain, we've been talking about copper and tin, but that they weren't the only minerals that were involved in the lode or incorporated in some of the lodes. And South Wheal Breage had tungsten or wolfram in its raw state of tungsten is wolfram. And South Wheal Breage had wolfram in the lode as well. Now, that really was a contaminant up until the early 1900s. Up till that point, tin is separated on gravity separation. So it's washed, and because tin is pretty much heavier than everything else, all the waste washes away, leaving the tin behind. But wolfram is almost the identical weight to tin. So, and they couldn't separate the two, one from the other. It wasn't until the early 1900s that they realised that wolfram was slightly magnetic. And so by heating it a bit, drying it, and putting the concentrate of the two through together, we put it over a magnetic separator and it would take the wolfram out of it. So it wasn't until then. But of course, wolfram then became a valuable commodity, especially when light bulb filaments, that sort of thing, hardening of shell tips in artillery, and tanks needed very hard steel, which was tungsten hardened as well. They call tungsten a warmonger. Wolfram is a warmonger because the price goes rockets up when there's a war of it. It's a mineral that the melting point of it is so high, it's about 3,000 degrees, that you can't melt it with heat. Well, you could, but the crucible that you would use to melt it in would melt before the tungsten did. So this is where your problem. It has to be chemically removed and treated. And they must have persevered quite a bit with it and been able to hand pick quite a bit of the wolfram out here, though, getting down to 800 some odd feet. But the reason I mentioned this little shaft, and I brought you here today, and why it got me into it, my grandfather said to my father, my grandfather was captain, of course, locally and mined all over the world, but he always came back to great work and would find the lodes again here, and if he could get mining started around getting festers in, he did. But he said to my father, he said, if ever wolfram becomes a price, he said, down South Wheal Breage, in the shaft there, he said, there is a scab of wolfram and tin mixed of about 10 tons. Please. And he said, one matter of in that hot summer of '76, we had a gentleman called and he said his name was Barry Cockroft, and that he was a television documentary maker, and that he had been, my father had been recommended to him as a talk about Cornish as an authority on tin mining. He had been responsible for making a documentary about a lady who had a farm in Yorkshire called Hannah, and it had been very successful. He had a holiday cottage in St Ives, and got chatting to people in the ship and said, look, I'm keen to make more documentaries on various things in Cornwall, lifeboats, fishermen, and I particularly like to do one on timber. And he got chatting to a man called Mike's ship, and Mike at the time was going down Leeds, where we saw with a tripod that they were exploring the workings there. And he said to Barry Cockcroft, he said, well, out that way, he said, chap from Wonderful Blaze, you want to go and see him? So he turned up on that evening. And my dad didn't need a lot of prompting to talk about mining. And so he told him to take. And he said, can I bring a tape recorder back? No. He came back following evening with a tape recorder. And put about 3 hours down on the stuff. And he said, I'm very interested in this. He said, would you be prepared to go on television? He said, talk about this and something. And then he said, I'll be back. Well, we didn't see him anymore for 12 months, and almost for 12 months. And he said, I've been going through the tapes, and he said, this story that your father told to you, this was my grandparents' father, he said, he talks about the scab of wolfram and tin mixed. He said, could you go and find it? Bluff call there. So my dad, what was he, 60 then, I suppose? He said, well, I'll have to see if my son will help me. So I said, yeah, I was 22 at the time. So we then agreed to go and look for this tin down this shaft. And we started filming on the 1st of October 1977. And we finished filming 12 months later on the 1st of October 1978. Of course, we went down the shaft, we opened it up, and put a ladder. We had a long pole ladder, almost 30 feet long. One good ladder. Put it down there, bottom of the shaft, nothing. All there was, this has been stoned up both sides, so the load was taken out completely back in very early times, then rebuilt with stone up both sides. And at the bottom of that, we had to repair bits and pieces, and there was a hole in the side of the shaft this way full of rocks and things. So we said, well, perhaps it's, it's been filled. There was rubbish in the shaft. So my dad built a little windlass, and of course these tin feet that sort of turned them on. He just didn't know what would really turn them on. And anyway, we had this little windlass here working on the ladders, and I was underground clearing the shaft on the other bucket, and I filled the bucket up, Dad would clean it up and tip. And I dug out as much as I could. It's about 6 foot to 4 foot, a little liner shaft. And I dug out as much as I could there. I broke up. So I put the foot down there to clear it where I could stand it, put right to the bottom, and a massive downrush about like that. And these tins rattled away down into the depths. So I'd have a rethink now. So we built a little we found by removing the rope of the windows and pulling the winding up, we took up a lot, and then the rest fell away and fell down to the fence. And we then had 4 ladders and platforms and down the fence to the people. And that old workings thrown away. Very, very old workings, probably 60 months. And or anything like that. No, you could see had been removed, probably by children almost, because I could just barely squeeze up into the workings in places so narrow. And it was very rich, the tin down there that we found, even what was left behind, but no sign of the wolfram. There was wolfram in other parts of it, but nowhere couldn't find this scab. Anyway, we worked down there all through winter and timber again, because these 13 would turn up with this film crew to film this, where one guy turns up there and doing his hand. And we had to get half of them underground to film and sound and all this sort of thing. And they looked at it down there and they thought, oh, they were available. So we had to timber everything out. Well, did a lot of work down there, but still no wolfram. And because the tin was rich, they were working the modern side of the Wheal, and we sent down, they came out, Charles Smith was their geologist then, and he had a look, and he said, just take this down, we'd like to know how much tin is in this. So he took it with him, and they were filming down there that day, vanning and assaying and things, and they said, shall we do the whole glaze sample just as another take? Of course, it went very rich, went around 5% on the, which is phenomenal. So they then persuaded us that hopefully say that we didn't realise it was Godolphin, but it was tin that they got, and that would be very well to do. So they would do a couple of hours filming, then we'd all go off to the pub, huge lunch, get very drunk, and then do perhaps half hours filming in the afternoon. So word was sent, can you come down to just right away? Went down there at lunchtime there, of course we was in the pub again, get 3 or 4 pints down the road. And right, we'd like you to sit in the phone box and pretend that you're taking a phone call from Charles in the RSA office, blah, 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 blah. And this is say that you're surprised that it's tin and all this sort of thing, which we do. We could have done it differently, really, with hindsight. But they will do what they want to do. They're making the film. They've got the stuff. They've got in their head what they want, and so they do it that way. And really, there's not a lot you can do to steer it in any other direction. But we got this result. And of course, we were about 10 or 11 months into it this time. We were wondering what the hell we were going to do to try and conclude this. So we had to do something. And as it happened, it worked. The film was shown. Next day, or a couple of days later, I had a letter from the old boy up the road. I was down there with your grandfather. I know exactly where that was. So we went up and saw him. And he said, a little hole in the side of the shaft, about 30 feet down. You go in there, parallel load, there on the wall, not many yards in. But of course, that had all fallen in, and we couldn't get to it. We tried then to drain that, but there was so much ore coming down. It was probably that far in, and you couldn't get in underneath it to timber it because all this was ready to fall on you all the time and still draining. And we kept draining and draining. And I said to my dad, I reckon this is running to surface, No, can't be, he said. And we went home for lunch, came back afterwards, and the hedge a bit further round had started to sink down. So it was actually running to surface. So we gave up on it. And but the offshoots of it were interesting. The whole thing was just a circus, really, with these people filming it and all the things that went with it. But we finished up the situation of the show because they filmed people coming out. When it was shown, English China Plays, who had the mineral rights, got on to Ken Gilbert, head of the mine captain down there. They said, "What are you doing on our mineral rights?" Well, when we started, we were some way into this. But really, we should be talking to English China Plays because we haven't got mineral rights. Well, you want to go and see them then? So we went up to Godolphin, banged on the door. Oh no, we don't encourage people to go into old rights. And they flatly refused. Oh yes, that's fine and dine in the executive suite. Yes, no problem. You go down there. Yeah, there will be no issues with that. But of course, that department hadn't spoken to the other department. So we were in a quandary. At that time, a chap called Jack Broadhurst, who my grandfather had given his first job at Lady Gwendolyn Mine as a geologist, he was 78 then. And he said, I still do some work for English China Plays. I'll have a look. And he managed to get them there. They had a look. Yes, they said, your workings are all safe. And they said, we'll give you a license, a mineral license. £5 a year, you can extract 100 tons of ore a year for assay purposes. So we were set up really. The price was way up. The price of tin, I think, was £9,000 a ton. Off from peak to the £12,000 a ton. If we found it, it would have been an absolute mint. We would have probably there's probably probably £100,000 worth, even if people would take everything we got. So we had a sale for it, we had a mineral license to get rid of it, and we had the price high. But price plummeted, and my dad became ill with cancer, and he was dead within 4 years. So that ended the Cornish troubadours of the 1980s, really, in the 1980s. But it's a disease, this is, the tinning, and it's not as virulent as gold fever, but it's surprising how virulent it is, and it remains in my veins to this day. So, but this is stuff we were taking out of there. You can see all the black in that is tin, and this is what came out from down there. It's not only in the lode down there, but it disseminates into the granite at the side of the lode, and that is the tin that goes into it.
So do you have a copy of the documentary?
Yes, I do have a copy of the documentary.
So when is film?
Yeah,
We need a screening, don't we?
yeah.
Yeah.
Screening again. Yeah, I'm 22, yeah.
So that would have been worked from probably what, 500,000 BC.
The Bronze Age people certainly worked only in alluvials and alluvials, but where we were at South Wheal Breage just now, we look out the lode outcrops there, and there is alluvial workings even on that, because the sea was lapping around this 30 million years ago, and there were pebbles. There's a pebble beach just about 20 yards down from that shaft you're looking at, which is right on the back of the lode. So they would have recognised the lode in the ground. So they would certainly, if they knew tin, so they would have certainly worked that. I don't know why they wouldn't have worked it that way. So there must have been a certain amount of lode working, especially here again, where it was outcropping on the surface, and would have been eroded quite significantly as well. So yeah. I'll just draw your attention to this shaft here. You can just see the wall around it. This was where the first Newcomen engine, the first steam engine, pumping engine, was put on Great Britain. It was a very early. They were very non-efficient, but it was the first working pumping engine that could realistically put on a mine to pump. They were used a lot on the coal mines because they had vast amounts of coal, of course, to fire it, so it made it efficient. But they used a lot of coal. But this was the site of the first. I think Wheal Bore is reputed to have the first one. Then it went to Ludgman Lees, and then it came here, and so it was on this shaft. My great whatever grandfather, Alexander Conway, was my captain here at that time. So he was here when that engine was put to work. And of course you had everybody then underground benefiting from the water. From the earlier workings, because there were so many shafts and they could work underneath everything, it wasn't necessary to use the crane shaft. But it was sunk because it was a particularly rich part of the mine, and it was where two lodes came together. So you had the Great Brick lode that runs straight down through here, but the Wheal Reef lode comes in at an angle. You can see the houses at Godolphin, they more or less run along the back of that lode. That joins with the Great Brick lode here in and there was where the two lodes come together. And this is a piece of pure black tin, really solid shining, as you can see how you can see the coarse crystals and how they reflect. But the other piece of this is in the Natural History Museum in London, part of the Russell collection. I think my grandfather actually plugged it to him and kept the smaller piece for himself. So, but you can see how rich that is. If you smelted that, you would have probably 70% of that, 65-70% of that is tin metal. But I'll tell the story again. Forgive me those who've heard the story before, but because this was always locked, even in the last war, it used to get filled right up to the brim with rubbish. And it was back in the 60s, like there must have been a television repair man who used to throw all his television tubes in there. And it was always filled with television tubes. But because us youngsters spent our time going round the sand dumps here then, it made a brilliant one. Today, BMX that we used really old push bikes then. Didn't use our best bikes because it would wear at the sprockets and do all sorts of damage with the sand. But old push bikes were an absolute premium. And I came in one day, I think must have been 10 or 11 years old, and it was the week before Christmas. And I looked in there, I was with my mate, Stephen Oscar, who lived down at the next college there, and there were 2 push bikes in on all the rubbish. Now, the old adage was, don't you go near these shafts, boy, you'll be killed. This is what we were always told. But 2 push bikes in there on a shaft that's never been anything other than what it was. What did I do? So I had to. So I jumped in there, threw them out, and off we went. And had a bike each and took it home, oiled it up, got it all freed up again, and off we went. But you always wonder if there's going to be another one. It must have been just before Christmas Eve. I knew it was close to Christmas, and I looked in there, and the shaft was away from the lake. And all I could hear was the water flowing in the bottom of the lake. Way down. And yeah, that's how close I came to going there. But it seemed to be big shafts and push bikes. Where I see
So what's in that little bit of black runners?
yeah, and tourmaline, not black, it's tourmaline. The fool's tin always called it.
Nice though.
Yes, oh yeah. This is where the old sand dump was. This with the stamping engine there, dressing rooms here, and then all the waste sand washed here. This is where we rode our bikes. It's changed so much. It's very good. Not of course where but they had the mini tin boom in the late 1970s, and they had huge swing shovels here, 20-ton lorries, and they were loading them up, taking them up to Breage up near Red Roof, and retreating all the sand that was here, getting considerable weight out as well. But also, what we've got here is not Deerpark Shaft. Deerpark Shaft is the last one on the load further down there. It's a fortune shaft here. This was refurbished and used as a shaft back in the 1930s. But prior to that, this was where the before Leeds was brought in for pumping, this was where the pumping was done on Good Fortune Shaft. And probably the quality of the load down this end was where they worked it at that time more efficiently. This, the pumping engine that was put on here was a Bolton and Watt engine, and that far surpassed the abilities of the new nuclear engine. 3 to much more efficient. Bolton and Watt, back in the 1794, sold an engine to Great adventurers to put on this shaft here on Good Fortune. But if they sold you the engine, that was not the full part of the contract. The contract that they drew up when they sold you the engine was that you had to pay them a third of your savings from coal. So if you were the 2/3 that you saved was to your advantage, but 1/3 of that you had to pay to Bolton and Watt. And of course, this was the setup with many Cornish tin mines at that time. They all bought a more efficient Bolton and Watt engine and agreed to pay 1/3 of their savings. But of course, directly came came into it quite significantly Polish adventurers, and none of them they were all very reluctant to pay up this third of their savings. Now, Christopher Wallace was an adventurer here in the 1790s. He was an attorney that lived at Trevarno and dealt with many, many mining matters on the legal side of it, but also invested heavily in local mining, particularly in Godolphin and Breage. And he was one of their top adventurers at the time. And he said, look, I don't see that they can take us to court on this. I don't see how this is going to go and work. And so they needed to make an example of somebody, Bolton did. So they took the Great Adventurers to court. And because Wallace was fighting the case on a professional level as well, it went to the High Court in London. And they owed the amount that Godolphin and Watt wanted was £11,000, which is what the Great Adventurers went for, was owing them. But the Christopher Wallace said, look, we're happy to pay £4,000, and you should be more than content with that. So it went to the High Court in London, and it went to the plaintiff. And Wallace kept a daily journal, and he said, to my great mortification. So they had to pay up the full £11,000. So that was Bolton and Watt for you. But Bolton and Watt, even though their engine at that time was very, very efficient, because they'd got patents, very robust patents taken out on it, which they kept renewing, it kept the Cornish engineers back for nearly 30 years, because they'd improved on Bolton and Watt's engine, and Trevithick particularly had introduced high pressure steam, which Watt said was one of the most dangerous things he'd ever heard of, because he didn't like the idea of it. But because it took 30 years for them to overcome the patent of Bolton and Watt to get the efficiency of engines really going again. And of course they were making them down here by that time in significant numbers. So interesting stories.